Hey everybody, I've got another podcast episode for you, and I have the wonderful Meg LaTorre, who you probably already know and love. She is going to chat with me about her different experiences, both as a writer and as an agent, and talk about her book that is coming out later this year, The Cyborg Tinkerer, and you're going to want to listen to that and mark that on your calendar. So let's go ahead and get to know Meg. So, Meg, can you start off by telling us about your debut novel that you are self-publishing?
Yes, absolutely. First, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be on today. But my book is called The Cyborg Tinkerer, and it is an adult steampunk with space travel and fantasy elements. It takes place in a cyborg circus, and the longer hook for the story is a circus competition, a tinkerer tasked with removing the losing cyborg's performer's implants. Who will she protect when she falls for both the handsome ringleader and the beautiful acrobat?
Ooh.
And then I know, I'm so excited. And I swear I rewrite these hooks all the time, guys, so it's very possible this is changing. But the shorter hook for this story is, in a deadly circus competition, even hearts are on the line. So my book is basically about a tinkerer. Her name is Gwendolyn Grimm, and she's recruited to work for this forbidden circus of cyborgs. After she joins, a competition to perform for the Emperor is announced, but the competition has deadly consequences, so losing acts have their cyborg implants forcibly removed, and those who survive the extraction are banished from the circus, and as a tinkerer, Gwendolyn is forced to perform the revolting task of removing the cyborg implants from the losing performers, and then when she falls for the man running the competition and a woman competing in it, she must decide who to protect. But can she risk having to harvest the people she loves most? So all that said, it's just basically a loose fairy tale mashup of Beauty and the Beast and Sleeping Beauty, where Belle falls in love with both the Beast and Sleeping Beauty. And as someone who is part of the LGBTQ community, I was so excited to write a bisexual polyamory romance.
Oh my gosh, it sounds awesome. I love it.
Thank you.
That is very exciting. So I feel like you've had your hand in a lot of different roles in the publishing world. You were a literary agent. You have your wonderful YouTube channel, iWriterly, where you just share wealths of knowledge. And now you're on to self-publishing. So can you just tell us a little bit about your journey so far through the publishing, the world, and how it got you to where you are today?
Absolutely. So when I was writing my earlier books, and as of now it's 2020, I've been writing for about 10 years. So when I was writing my earlier books and learning about the world of traditional publishing, I found the work of literary agencies fascinating and I wanted to get involved. So I applied for an internship at the Corvisiero Literary Agency. I want to say it was in 2016. I ended up getting a position in a bit of a roundabout way, and I interned at the agency for a few years before I was promoted and started taking on my own clients. And while I love the work, my family came down on hard times and I just couldn't afford to work on like a commission only basis. So I was forced to leave. Really sad about that, but it was due to personal reasons. But while I was at the agency, I started my YouTube channel, iWriterly, after seeing so many writers making the same mistakes when they queried me. I decided I wanted to create some type of resource to help writers to avoid common pitfalls and hopefully have like a slightly smoother road to publication. And then when the iWriterly channel grew, we eventually kind of expanded it into its own entity, including not just the YouTube channel, but a website and other social platforms. And now we eventually made our own company. So we're iWriterly LLC, which is where I will publish my books under. So to answer your question about the self-publishing, it was a tough decision. And as someone who formerly worked in the traditional publishing space, I'd always thought I would publish my debut novel traditionally and have hybrid publishing books. So I did intend to self-publish them and traditionally publish others. But after spending years on YouTube doing like collaborations with indie authors, I was surprised and my eyes were open to the possibilities of self-publishing. And I don't think this path is right for everyone because there's a buttload of work that goes into self-publishing. But I think seeing the success and happiness of indie authors gave me the courage to reconsider about how I wanted to approach my debut novel. And I just thought that with my own personal skill sets, I thought I could do this book and story justice on my own. And so I've taken the leap and I'm really excited to share my debut novel with readers.
That is awesome. I love that, you know, where you are now, you did get to see both sides of it, work with indie authors and in the traditional world. And I feel like every author kind of, well, maybe not every author, but I totally have. Like I have had family members who've self-published and talked to a lot of authors who are self-published and like thriving and doing so great. And so you sit there and you're like, oh wait, like which one should I go for? But I love that you are, taking that leap and, probably have a little bit more control over your story and everything that's going on with it. And I'm sure that's super exciting.
It is. I think creative control is one of the biggest pros for most people that are thinking about pursuing self-publishing. And I do have a pros and cons video for self-publishing and pros and cons for traditional publishing. But I think like if you hate marketing and you hate it so much that you're like, I wanted to do as little as possible, maybe traditional publishing is for you. That doesn't mean you're going to do zero marketing,
right?
Because even traditionally published authors have to do marketing these days. But I think you have to assess your skill sets. Are you a business-minded person? If so, maybe self-publishing is for you. Or if you really want to do some like the traditional paths of traditional publishing and work with, get the what's it called, the trade reviews and go to industry shows, then maybe that is a path for you. So anyways, yeah, it's certainly not for everybody, but I thought it was for me.
Yeah, and I'm excited to see how it all turns out, and I'm sure it'll be so awesome to have your book in your hands and share it with everybody.
Goodness, yes, I'm very excited to get those proofs.
Yeah, that is awesome. So I have a couple, query questions for you, just with your experience. I'd love to know any tips or golden rules for authors you have, for authors who are querying right now.
I would say to follow the submission guidelines. If you do that, you are already standing out from the crowd. So if an agent, and I hate to say it like that because it sounds so simple, but it's so true.
Mm-hmm.
I would say like 60 to 70% of writers that I saw when I was reading submissions, they did not follow the submission guidelines at all. And so it could be something as simple as like if the agent wants a query in the first 5 pages and a synopsis in the body of the email with no attachments, send exactly what they ask for. Don't try to skip the line. I remember seeing authors send their full manuscripts in an otherwise empty email. And you're like, what is this? Like, I'm not going to open it. It could have a virus.
Right.
Yeah. So like follow the submission guidelines, guys. Look at like the main submission guidelines page because almost all agencies have it. And then also look at the individual agent's bio of the person that you want to submit to because sometimes they differ. And if they do differ, like if the agent wants the first 50 pages, but the main submission guideline page says send the first 5 pages, send what the agent asked for because that's the person you're submitting to, not the general agency page.
That's a very, like you said, a very simple tip, but super crucial. I was just scrolling through Twitter and saw something from an agent where she requires a synopsis, and she was listing all the responses of people, what they put in the synopsis, field, like synopsis available upon request. Like she is already requesting it. Like just follow the guidelines and put it in there. It makes it so much easier.
Yeah, and just to have that information up front, it's so helpful for like an agent or for the readers because sometimes interns read the cold query. Sometimes it's like a literary assistant. It really all depends. But like just to have all that information right up front, you can better understand if it's going to be a good fit. And if you don't have it, sometimes agents will auto reject you. So follow the guidelines, people.
Just give yourself a little extra chance by following the guidelines.
Yeah.
So what was, and maybe, just in your overall experience, would be your number one query no-no that you saw a lot?
I would say not following the submission guidelines is probably the number one query no-no. So not to repeat the last thing, that was like, again, 60 to 70% of writers who are querying didn't follow it. And it was like they didn't even look at the website.
That's crazy.
Maybe they would email a group of agents and CC everybody, and then everyone would see it. There's a lot of big don't do's. I would say just look at the agency's website, read every single individual agent's bio there, see what they represent. Because if you're writing young adult fantasy and you're querying the person who represents nonfiction, it's an automatic rejection. So look at what they represent. Do you think it would be a good fit? Have they sold books in your age category and genre before? And if so, follow the guidelines to submit to them properly.
I love it. Very simple but crucial advice. So now we're going to get into some writing questions. My first one for you is, what is the hardest part of writing for you?
This is going to be different for every single writer, but for me personally, I struggle with drafting. I really love editing, and like the first draft is where like you're getting to know the characters and you're fleshing out your plot, and that's all very intimidating to me because I don't 100% know where everything is going, but I far prefer have the pieces in front of me, even if they're kind of icky looking, and polishing them up.
Definitely. Drafting is that blank page, or even the semi-blank page, is daunting. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I've been editing something, a manuscript for like 2-3 years, and to have to start something brand new, I was like, did I really do this before? Like, I really started from scratch and wrote a whole book? I don't remember how I possibly did that.
Yeah, it's a totally different muscle than editing. Yeah, and it can be terrifying.
It definitely can. So on the flip side of that, what is the best part of being a writer for you, and also being an author?
I really like that getting to be creative is part of my job. And I think all humans strive to have some type of creative outlet. And I think that's very fulfilling for our human nature. So I love that that's kind of built into what I do. I also like exploring possibilities. So what if the world was like this? Or what if a character had to choose between these things? To, like, kind of explore, I guess, part of human nature. I find that very fascinating. And then I think the tough part about being a writer and an author is shifting from writing as your creative outlet to a career. And I do think there is a mindset shift at some point. Usually it's when your first book is coming out. But at that point, once like the negative reviews and feedback start coming in, it's like a process of having another creative outlet while still enjoying the process of writing. But I love the creative stuff, but I do think there's a slight shift to a career set focus at some point.
There definitely is, and I think that can be a hard transition for some people, especially as, whether you do self-pub or traditional pub. I think, when you transition into maybe having an agent and an editor, and really seeing and hearing different things you have to change or do is could be difficult. I feel like feedback is something that is hard to digest at times for all people, especially on something that is so near and dear to your heart. And so definitely realizing as you get farther into the process that it becomes more of a business than just, fun and something you do because you love it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I love this next question. I love to know different people's writing styles. So I would love to know if you're more of a pantser, more of a planner, or somewhere in between. And I feel like with what your novel is about, I feel like you probably have tons of world building and really cool details and all of that. So I'd love to kind of see how you've figured all that out.
Yeah, when I started out my writing journey, I feel like most writers start as pantsers because we don't 100% know what we're doing when we first write that very first novel. But this most recent novel, I was like a hardcore planner, plotter, architect, whatever you want to call it. I will write the plot outline first, and then once I have that solidified, I write chapter by chapter outlines. And that's just because I'm a really bad overwriter. And so these outlines help me to keep my word count in check.
Well, that is interesting. I am an underwriter. And
Really?
that's maybe because I'm more of a in between a pantser and a plotter. But yeah, I feel like more of the time I underwrite and end up adding, stuff as I go through revisions. But my first drafts are always a little short. But see, it's so interesting that we're all very different in the way that we do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you outline it all, or do you just kind of like jump right in?
I do outline. So usually sometimes I jump right in with like the first idea that I have and kind of get some words down on a page, but then I'll step back and outline, because most of mine are like murder mysteries, so there is a sense of outlining you have to do to keep everything all straight, the victims, the clues, and all of that. And but I outline probably like very broadly, so like big main points, and then kind of pants in the middle. And it makes it for, like, I have to revise a lot, but but it makes it so I have a little bit more freedom as I go along, because I've always felt very stifled by outlines. I feel like once I write it down, I have to make it happen, and if in the moment it's not working for me, sometimes that's hard for me to work my brain around somehow.
That's so interesting. I hear that a lot for people that kind of lean on the pantser end of the spectrum, where they it's either that, or they feel like if they write it down in an outline, that takes away the joy of the discovery of the thing, part of the story. So I guess we're all different.
We are, but I love that. I just love to know how other people do it, because I have heard other things and I'm like, oh gosh, I want to try that and see if that would work for me. But I love to just have everybody feel a little bit validated, like, oh, I do it like this person, or I do it a little different, but it still works for me. Because when I first really got into my writing journey, I thought I started out really hardcore outlining, because I was in like a very academic sense in my head, and I'm like, that's how you would write a paper for school, so that's how I should write my book. And it did not work for me very well. So I like to, see the transition and how other people go about it.
Wow, okay, so my hypothesis is completely incorrect about how first books go, so that's so interesting.
It's a little bit different for everybody, I'm sure, but I have talked to some authors who are complete pantsers and pants the whole thing the whole entire way, and it totally works for them. I'm like, that's amazing to keep all that straight in your head. And like I was mentioning with yours, I feel like you probably, the outline really helps with keeping different world building facts and all of that straight too, because I imagine that would be a lot to remember if you were a pantser and going through the whole thing.
Actually, I have a glossary where I have all the world specific terms, and that is like a separate document. And then I have my outline, which is just strictly the events. So I think for me, for this particular story, it's sort of a steampunk, sort of a space opera thing, that if I didn't have the glossary, I would get very confused. But I think just the outline is just like here's this event, but I think it's a competition book, and I think competition books are much more easier to structure anyways.
I have never written one, but maybe that is true. But yeah, I haven't ever written something where I needed a glossary to help me. I do have a murder board for each of my books, though, with all the victims and all that stuff, because I wouldn't be able to keep track of all of that without it.
Okay, gotcha.
So it shows up in each writer's work maybe with a little bit differently. So my next question for you, I would love to know when your love of writing began.
I think I was always one of those people that I always loved writing since I was a youngin'. I thought it was fabulous. I think I wrote my first full-length novel, and I'm going to do that in air quotations so you cannot see me do it. I think I wrote that first full-length novel at the age of 10, but I don't actually consider that my first novel.
Right.
I think it's been about 10 years of writing novels, but I think I always loved it. I was a child that always loved books, never felt entirely like I fit in anywhere, and so I loved stories, and then at some point I was like, I'm going to write my own stories.
I love it. I was definitely a very similar way. I didn't finish my first book until I was in high school, but again, that's the one that's like one that will never be read. It will sit under my bed forever. But I always wrote stories, and I always, I remember one that I wrote in like the very beginning of high school. It was very dark now that I think back about it. It was about a house fire and girl witnessing her whole family dying, and I'm like, oh my goodness, what was going on with me back then? But I was definitely the kind where I would read these amazing books and be like, that is what I need to do someday, is write stories that make me feel the same way these books do, and that is still what we're trying to do today.
Amen. And
yes.
Also amen to the angsty words of a teenager. We've totally been there.
Yeah. So I have just one last question for you. It's my favorite question because, we're all writers and authors, but we're all readers too, and there's so many good books out there. And so I would love to know what your favorite book is right now. This isn't your favorite book of all time, just a book you've read recently that you really loved.
How many am I allowed to give?
However many you want.
Okay. I think the one that I talk about on my YouTube channel the most frequently is Nevernight by Jay Kristoff. It's a trilogy. I think Nevernight, God's Grave, and Darkdawn are the three. It's so witty to me, and I know a lot of people are kind of turned off by some of the ways that Kristoff turns tropes on its head and kind of plays with your expectations, but it's so stinking funny to me. And it's a high fantasy book. So the fact that you can have like this epic fantasy book be hysterical, I love it.
That's the best.
Right. I'm also obsessed with Brandon Sanderson. His most recent series, I mean, he's got a million recent series, but one of them is The Way of Kings is the first book title, and it's fabulous. These books are like ridiculously long, so if you don't like books that exceed 1,000 pages in length, maybe not for you. And another good one is The Collapsing Empire by John Scalzi. That I don't think the series is finished. There's 2 books in the series, but it's in space opera, also very witty, also very funny. Love that series.
Wonderful. I love to get different favorite books from people, because there's so many books out there, and so many books come out every Tuesday and have come out for so long that you can never catch all of them. So I love to hear what other people are reading and what they've loved.
Right? I feel like most of the books that I read these days are from like referrals or recommendations.
Yeah, which is the best, right? Word of mouth. Meg, thank you so much for chatting with me today and letting me get to know you a little bit better and sharing some of your knowledge with me. And everybody, go watch out for her book, The Cyborg Tinkerer. Thank you guys so much for listening and getting to know Meg. Please make sure to go and support her and pre-order her book when that's an option, and just give her all the love. And as always, rate and review and share this podcast with your friends.